I am Timo Vekara, professor in electrical engineering at the University of Vaasa. I wish you all warmly welcome to this Veritas Forum in Vaasa. Vaasa is a city of 60,000 inhabitants at west coast of Finland. It is said that it is a capital of Nordic countries in the field of energy. We have about 160 companies in field of energy. After remoting mode, we still try to come and work or study in this campus. It is challenging for us to be here, especially for the incomers. Another challenge is, as it has been a long time, that especially many students stay alone, also alone in their problems. But let's hope that in this discussion we will get ideas how to continue in our daily tasks. In this debate or discussion, we have a heading and subheading: when life does not turn out the way I hoped for, dealing with circumstances. As a visiting guest, we have Amy Orr-Ewing in Zoom. She holds doctorate in theology from University of Oxford. She is author of multiple books, including Where is God in All the Suffering, and best-selling Why Trust the Bible. As another speaker, we have here Tommi Lehtonen, who is present. He's from University of Vaasa. Previously, he was professor in philosophy, and now he holds leadership in a research platform called InnoLab at the University of Vaasa, which targets at innovations and entrepreneurship. Tommi's specialties are responsibility, sustainability, and ethics. And as a moderator, we have here Victoria Grönlund. She's a psychologist. She works as occupational health psychologist in Vaasa. So welcome all, and now Victoria, you could continue on this.
Thank you. Welcome all of you from my part. As Timo said, I'm Victoria. I'm born in this city, Vaasalainen. I work in Mehiläinen as a psychologist, and I'm thrilled to be here with you. Veritas Forum, I don't know how well known that concept is to you, but I'll tell you a little bit what it is. Veritas Forum is a network organizing events with the purpose of exploring the big ideas that change our lives, that shapes our lives. And it puts the Christian faith in a dialogue with other beliefs. It invites participants from all kinds of backgrounds in order to together seek truth. That's why we're here today. We want to explore this topic of when life does not turn out the way we hoped for, how to deal with circumstances. The speakers are especially welcome: Tommi, Amy, and this is one example of how life doesn't really turn out the way we want to, because Amy, you're now sitting here by Zoom, and we're of course happy that you are here, but it had been even better if we had seen you in person. But we're thankful that you are here. She comes even despite she's a little bit sick. So thank you for being here, even though it's not the perhaps best feeling. You were already a bit introduced. Tommi is from this university, and Amy is from Oxford. And Amy is also lecturing in Aberdeen, and the rest you heard. A little bit about the background of Veritas Forum. It was started in 1992 at Harvard, And since that, it has spread first all over the United States, then also to Asia, then it came to Europe. And here in Vaasa, the first forum in Finland was held. That was in 2012. So it's been here now for a number of years. The outline of today will be that the speakers will be given 15 minutes each, introducing the subjects. Afterwards, the speakers will be able to comment and ask questions to each other. And after that, it's your turn. You might be able to ask questions. So right now, whenever you feel a question, you can write it down so that you remember it, because you will be given a chance to ask questions. We have 2 hours reserved for this event. So let's see if we will keep the 2 hours. I think the theme of today, dealing with circumstances when life doesn't turn out the way you hoped for, it's a very universal theme. Me as a psychologist, I meet these kind of topics in my daily work. Because for some reasons, life doesn't normally turn out the way we hoped for. To some, perhaps it starts already in childhood. Perhaps you've suffered from childhood neglect. Perhaps your home wasn't the way you wanted your home to be. Or perhaps you had a really happy childhood, but then you faced troubles. Perhaps you were bullied. Perhaps you met some problems. As a student, perhaps it's difficult finding out what to study. Perhaps it's difficult getting it done. As years pass by, you might meet all kinds of difficulties, sickness, things happening in the career, disappointments, not finding the job you wanted, perhaps not facing the appreciating you wanted, perhaps going through a divorce, perhaps not getting children, etc. We do meet circumstances which is not as we wish them to be. So I'm excited being here and hearing your thoughts about this topic. So first of all, Amy, please, what do you think about this topic? Now it's your turn.
Thank you so much, and thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of this event. And I'm sorry that I was unable to travel as I have COVID, and life has not turned out as we had hoped, as has just been mentioned. So as has already been mentioned, I've written a book called Where is God in All the Suffering, that asks the question from a different perspective, more of a philosophical question. How could there be a loving God and this be the world there is? But today we're exploring this question of when life doesn't turn out the way I'd hoped for, how do we actually deal with those circumstances? And if we are honest, life is going to feel like a real struggle at times. We just need to look at the news and see the thousands who died in the earthquake in Turkey. Or perhaps we might think of the many people who've been devastated by the conflict in Ukraine. My husband and I have a conservation farm just in the south of England, and we were able to welcome 2 Ukrainian ladies to come and live there and to stay there. And every single one of the men in their lives, whether that was a husband, a son, a nephew, a brother, all of the men were fighting, utterly devastating. Or whether it's we go through an experience of loss, the death of someone close to us. A few years ago now, 4 years ago now, a very close friend of mine died, leaving 3 children, including a 6-week-old baby, and I held that baby at my friend's funeral. Devastating. Or perhaps we're close to people who've experienced abuse and the shattering experience of abuse in this world. Not just then the experience of the abuse itself, but maybe trying to navigate the justice system and trying to bring a perpetrator to justice. or perhaps some of us might have experience of chronic illness or other kinds of suffering. And if the statistics are to be believed closer to home, many of us will experience something traumatic or may go through other mental health challenges like depression or anxiety. Until late 2020, I had never really faced prolonged or overwhelming anxiety. I'd experienced nerves and natural fears. I'd been in dangerous situations. I'd, had that fight or flight type of instinct kick in. But in late 2020, I went through a traumatic experience that was abusive and it was intense. And it was compounded by other things that we all went through during the pandemic. And the cumulative impact of it all was profound. And so I found myself asking this question that is before us today: when life doesn't turn out the way I hope for, how do we actually deal with those circumstances? And does God or the Christian faith have anything to offer us in those kinds of circumstances? It's not just me that has faced anxiety. Our age has been described as an age of anxiety. And the Guardian newspaper, you may be aware of, a British newspaper online, but internationally widely read, put it like this. The writer said, "We are in the grip of an anxiety epidemic that predates Trump's presidency and the pandemic. Indeed," the writer says, "we have become so collectively consternated that a 2016 analysis led by the World Health Organization estimated that without more treatment, 12 billion working days will be lost because of anxiety each year." And the study estimated the cost of the global economy up to 2030 as being $925 billion US. And studies seem to suggest that anxiety spreads and travels. We can pick it up like secondhand smoke. Researchers Howard Friedman and Ronald Riggio from the University of California, Riverside, found that if someone in your visual field is highly anxious and expressive, either verbally or non-verbally, there's a high likelihood that you will experience those emotions as well, negatively impacting you and your brain's performance. A separate group of researchers found that 26% of people showed elevated levels of cortisol just observing someone who was stressed. And they found that that was much more contagious from a romantic partner, 40%, than from a stranger. But when observers watched a stressful event on video, even just obviously involving strangers, 24% of us showed a stress response. It puts a whole new light on trying to watch Netflix before you go to bed. So I wonder if you think there is any hope in the midst of all of this anxiety. And I wonder where we might look to find that hope when circumstances are difficult. Or perhaps we might turn to institutions. We might look to the institutions of Western society to help us in these circumstances. Well, the scholar Friedman argued that anxiety has become such a dominant factor in the modern world. He describes America, but I think it applies in other Western economies as well, as awash with worry. And in his research, he suggests that in the West, institutions used to play a role in absorbing our collective anxiety. Systems like healthcare systems or justice systems or political systems played this role of being able to absorb our collective anxiety. But as these institutions have been shaken, so our confidence in them has been undermined, and they are no longer able to absorb the systemic national anxiety in the way they used to. And that is why, Friedman argues, we feel such stress and worry at a general and pervasive level. So there's a cultural phenomenon here. We may in the past have sought to turn to institutions In the West as well, we have often sought to turn towards idealizing affluence or consumerism to be able to cushion us from hurt and harm. Michael Norton, a Harvard Business School professor, studies the connection between well-being and wealth. And he did a study in which he asked more than 2,000 people who had a net worth of at least $1 million US, including many whose wealth far exceeded that threshold. He asked them how happy they were on a scale of 1 to 10. And then he asked them how much more wealth they would need to get from where they were to get to a 10. And all the way up the income wealth spectrum, beginning at $1 million US, Norton concluded that basically everyone said that they would need 2 or 3 times as much as they already had to get to that perfect 10. Robert Skidelsky put it like this in his book, How Much Is Enough? Money in the Good Life. He said, experience has taught us that material wants know no natural bounds, that they will expand without end unless we consciously restrain them. And capitalism rests precisely on this endless expansion of wants. And he says that is why, for all its success, it remains so unloved. It's given us wealth beyond measure, but has taken away the chief benefit of wealth, the consciousness of having enough. I wonder where else people might turn. We might turn to institutions to help us, or turn to affluence. Perhaps some of us turn to other substances. But I want to suggest today that there is another alternative, another place that we can turn to for help in this hurting world, and when circumstances in our lives don't turn out quite as we'd hoped. I want to suggest today that in the person of Jesus Christ, God offers people hope when life doesn't turn out the way we had hoped. And I think that there are 2 specific and practical and testable claims that Jesus makes about giving us real hope in our hurt and in our disappointment in this world. And the first claim is his claim to be able to give human beings peace. Jesus speaks directly and powerfully into our anxious world. He says things like, do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. He said other things in the New Testament like this. He said, I am the light of the world. Anyone who follows me will never walk in darkness. And he said, my peace I give you, my peace I leave with you, and I do not give as the world gives. Within the Christian scriptures, we find voice given to human feelings of anxiety, abandonment, disappointment, but also the expression of hope, that help can be found and a refuge can be found in the living God. In the Christian faith, we're safe to be honest about how hard things are, and we are offered hope that we are not alone in this world, and that there is this offer that God can meet us in a real way, including in our fear and discomfort, and that he can deliver us and help us. And in the life of Jesus, the heart of the Christian faith is the claim that God was with us in history. We see Jesus identify alongside our humanity in suffering by being crucified. And actually that before his crucifixion, Jesus endured such intense anxiety that he sweated drops of blood. Such was his identification with us as human beings. Jesus Christ offers human beings the possibility of a relationship with God, a context to be safe, to work out our anxiety and our trauma, and in that context, the possibility of receiving a peace that is beyond this world and a new life as we do that. A few months ago, I was speaking in a church in a city in the UK, and I met one of the pastors in that church. Previously, she had been trafficked to that city and had been forced by those who were running her life to work the streets. She'd been a sex worker, and she had met Jesus Christ 12 years before I met her. She'd received support and rehabilitation. She'd got completely clean from drugs, and she'd begun to follow Jesus. She'd also received trauma therapy, and alongside that had grown in a deep knowledge of the love of God. And she now works reaching out to women on the same streets of the same British city that she had been forced to work in. And she's one of the freest and most joy-filled people I've met. The love and the peace of God broke into her life. And because of Jesus, alongside help from therapy and psychological support, she lives free at the deepest level. There's a truth that undergirds her life that's undeniably real. So the first thing I want to suggest that is a specific and practical and testable claim when life hurts, when life gives us disappointments and circumstances beyond our control, that first claim of Jesus is that he can offer us peace. Second claim I just want to briefly examine before my little bit is over is Jesus' claim to be able to offer us forgiveness. It was the author of the Harry Potter novels, J.K. Rowling, who said it is impossible to live without failing at something, unless you live so cautiously that you might as well not have lived at all, in which case you fail by default. Whether we live conscious and afraid of our failures, or whether we fail by living too cautiously, all of us as human beings live under the spectre of failure. And so a massive question today is the question, can I be forgiven? Is redemption possible when I fail? Of course, this is one of the great themes of literature, but it's perhaps more poignant today than ever as we in Western cultures live under the shadow of cancel culture. Cancel culture might be described as the impetus to punish people whose ideas or behaviour we disagree with by withdrawing support or encouraging others to shun the transgressor. But once we've been cancelled, there's no hope for public forgiveness, and there's no hope for redemption. Accountability is everything. Redemption is impossible. Now, of course, free speech advocates and intellectuals are kind of wringing their hands in despair at this. But we might note that bubbling under the surface of cancel culture is a kind of profound concern for justice. Cancel culture strikes against the idea that nothing really matters. Cancel culture strikes against the individualism of consumerism, and it affirms that human beings are communal beings, that what we think and do actually matters. Cancel culture seeks to hold powerful people to account in some ways. So there are some real positives there. But of course, it also notably holds out no possibility of redemption or forgiveness because it says wrongdoing matters so much. Cancel culture sort of sees forgiveness as moral weakness, because to forgive would be to undermine how wrong the wrongdoing was, to somehow minimize the harm and the pain caused. I want to suggest that the forgiveness that Jesus Christ offers actually says something really profound to the concern of cancel culture, because the instinct in cancel culture that somebody needs to pay, that wrongdoing is so serious that somebody needs to die, actually points towards Jesus of Nazareth as God incarnate, willingly dying by crucifixion at the hands of the Romans. His death is described in the New Testament as a ransom, an offering, and a sacrifice. The Christian claim is that he pays a price for the transgressions of the world, and that means the forgiveness that he offers can be real, because the price we all feel intuitively must be paid is actually paid by Jesus. So where forgiveness is rejected by the crusaders of cancel culture as moral weakness, denying the seriousness of wrongdoing, Christian forgiveness doesn't say that the harm or wrongdoing didn't hurt, it wasn't wrong, or it didn't matter. This kind of forgiveness means it did hurt, it was wrong, and it does matter, but there is a power beyond us to actually forgive, because we believe the transgression will be judged by a higher authority than you or me. And because someone has paid, and that payment required the death of God in history, the seriousness of the hurt is underlined. But it also means forgiveness lies within the realm of possibility for all of us. So forgiveness at the heart of the Christian faith doesn't deny the potency of the hurt or the seriousness of the failure. But there is a power outside of ourselves, both to receive forgiveness and to give it. I think that's really profound in our cultural moment where we live under the spectre of the fear of failure, but we also live with this strong intuitive sense that harm and injustice matter at a really deep level. So I want to suggest that those two possibilities that Jesus offers of real peace and the possibility of forgiveness actually speak to us both in our cultural moment, but also in our experiences of life and circumstances hurting us, or bringing us to that sense of life not turning out the way we had hoped for. So thank you so much for listening.
Input, I think. Tommi Lehtonen, it's your turn. Welcome.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, hello. Hi, everyone. My name is Tommi Lehtonen, and I'm Director of Responsibility and Ethics here at the University of Vaasa. First and foremost, I would want to thank the event's organizers and Veritas Forum Finland for inviting me to deliver a talk on today's topic, which is both interesting and vital. And also thank you very much, Amy, for your wonderful talk, and I'm looking forward. It's fantastic to have the chance to talk with you later today. So today's topic, as you can see the title here, it's significant and relevant to all of us. It is apparent, perhaps even self-evident, that life does not always go according to plan. How should we respond to such events and conditions? In my talk, I will address this issue using the ChatGPT, artificial intelligence bot. I'm confident that you have all heard about ChatGPT. It is an artificial intelligence-powered natural language processing application that enables us to have human-like conversations, whatever that means, and much more. Namely, ChatGPT provides responses to questions and assists with tasks such as email writing, essay writing, and coding. Maybe something that you among us who are students think that's relevant from your point of view and in your role. While ChatGPT is in the research and feedback gathering phase, its public usage is now free. ChatGPT is and was designed and released in November of last year. by OpenAI, an artificial intelligence and research firm in the United States. Thus, ChatGPT is quite new. So, next slide, please. So, given our team, I posed the following inquiry to ChatGPT. How can I deal with circumstances in which life does not turn out the way I hoped for? The ChatGPT responded to the inquiry as follows. Please, next file or slide. Yeah, here you can see in one view the answer I got in its entirety. And I'm not going to read it because you can see now it, but I will shortly comment some aspects in this. So in what follows, I will provide a few quick observations on the guidance that ChatGPT offers. First, you may note how compact, if not elegant, ChatGPT's response to our inquiry is. The response fits on one page or one slide, which is helpful because lengthy responses can be difficult to digest, especially since many, if not most people, no longer read lengthy texts because they prefer to swiftly go between postings and headlines on their smartphones. So I think that this is relatively concise and short answer that many people may find a good thing. However, one of the members of events organizing team pointed me out that still this one slide contains a lot of information, possibly too much information. So it may be a little bit difficult to read for you because there are so many words and sentences. And one might say that it is as though ChatGPT spat its responses at us. This actually demonstrates that ChatGPT lacks empathy and is unable to comprehend that a worried or distressed individual is not prepared to hear a list of well-intentioned advice, no matter how wonderful those suggestions are. If you were to imagine one of your friends approaching you with a list like this, I am sure that you would say, please stop. This is too much for me. Too many things cannot be taken in at the same time. So if someone wants to help us, he or she must understand that help comprises much more than just advice or good list of advice. Respect and empathy may be far more important than your counsel. That is something I doubt ChatGPT is capable of. You may also find interesting that while ChatGPT identifies many acts or types of behaviors that might alleviate your anxiety while confronting disappointment, it is probably doing so based on current therapy and self-help resources available on the internet. Hence, ChatGPT, even if it's said that it's intelligent or it's in an artificial intelligence, ChatGPT is not extremely intelligent compared to humans, but it is adept at locating web resources, and one could argue at plagiarism. It makes no reference to any sources. It gives, this is like the word of God. It just appears. It comes to you from somewhere. Who knows from where? No, probably from some sources that are available on the internet. Another quick note is that the advice ChatGPT provides is relatively neutral in terms of worldviews, religions, and ideologies. As stated, therapy and self-help literature have most likely strongly influenced that ChatGPT answer. But ChatGPT does not explicitly refer to any identifiable religious, philosophical, political, or worldview set of background assumptions. ChatGPT does mention meditation in Advice 5. But even meditation is now a worldview neutral thing and does not necessarily presuppose any particular religious tradition. Think about mindfulness, a popular form of meditation that has some roots in Buddhism, but is now viewed as a secular practice. Even more crucial is the fact, as I previously mentioned, that none of the ChatGPT recommended procedures or actions are simple to execute when experiences anxiety. In such a circumstance, or in the midst of disappointment, it feels as though your anxiety is too large and deep for you to escape. The first advice from ChatGPT is a solid starting point regardless. Do not deny that you are anxious, disappointed, upset, or unhappy, but acknowledge that this is how you feel right now and how the situation seems to you right now. After some time, a few days or weeks, you may be able to reframe the situation and identify other possible steps and perspectives. This type of self-honesty is the cornerstone for overcoming life difficulties, if they can be overcome. It may be of some interest to know that at the turn of the 2nd century, Epictetus, a Stoic philosopher who was influential in Rome, observed, and this is quote or translation, the original text was in Latin. So Epictetus said in this way, "It isn't the things themselves that disturb people, but the judgments that they form about them." Actually, this thought is echoed in Shakespeare's Hamlet, where there is the following statement: "For there is nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so." The Stoic wisdom complements ChatGPT suggestion number 6 pretty well. Reframe your thinking. However, you may think that it is easier said than done. It might be difficult to alter our thoughts, not necessarily due to what we know, but due to how we feel and how we are inclined to react. As stated, Epictetus was a Stoic philosopher. In general, the concept of apathy is considered one of the trademarks of Stoic philosophy. Apathy is derived from the Greek term apatheia. It was employed by Stoic to describe the ideal condition of being indifferent to things beyond one's control. As a result, reframing your thoughts may entail not being concerned about something beyond your control. I believe it is easier said than done. It is also relevant to remark that apathy nowadays refers to insensitivity or numbness and emotional stagnation, neither of which relate to the Stoic ideal. Practice gratitude, that is the second element of ChatGPT advice, is likewise difficult to implement. Even though you know you have every reason to be grateful for your life, it can be difficult to be grateful because we want more than we have and believe it is right to desire more. You may recall a song by British rock band Queen that aggressively asserts, "I want it all and I want it now." The third piece of ChatGPT advice is to reconsider your expectations. This advice complements suggestion number 6, reframe your thinking, which we just addressed. The fourth piece of advice, to seek help, is likewise sound and essential. Others are not always able to fix our issues, but it's comforting to have someone by your side when you are unhappy or nervous. But occasionally, if not frequently, we confront our difficulties alone, without the assistance of anybody else. Numbers 5 and 7 are related. Engage in things that offer you joy and help you relax, such as having a good conversation with a friend or going for a stroll with your dog. Advices from 4 to 7 inspire us to take action, whether that action is social or physical, or mental or physical. To summarize, ChatGPT suggests that when life does not go as planned, you must act both inside you, that is, towards yourself and your attitudes and ways of thinking, and externally, towards other people and external circumstances, through concrete actions, like walking and leisure pursuits. In conclusion, while many of the recommendations made by ChatGPT are mental or psychological in nature, they are ultimately recommendations that motivate action, including, and this is a hybrid of mental and physical activities, discussions with your friends. This is sound advice, in my opinion, but it's equally important to realize that life is not a planned endeavor, and so cannot be linked to a painting or a building. In a metaphorical sense, one might argue that our plans twist into a multitude of patterns in the kaleidoscope of life. Finally, I asked ChatGPT another question. Please, next slide. The question was, could you recommend any books or articles that address the issue of how to deal with situations in life in which life does not go as planned? Because we are now at the university, I assume that it would be good to offer you something concrete, and because at the university the concrete often means books or articles. That's what you get now. ChatGPT responded to the inquiry as follows. Please, next slide. Okay, here's a list of five books, or actually six, yeah. 5 books. There should be 5. Okay, yeah, I have counted wrongly. The mistake is not done by ChatGPT. I made the wrong numbering, so do not blame the ChatGPT. There are six books mentioned in the list. Actually, there is one mistake that ChatGPT made. It said that, as you can see here, the first 2 or 3 lines, it is said that here are some book and article recommendations. Actually, all of these are books, so there are no article recommendations. So ChatGPT is not. It can also make mistakes, obviously. Okay. As you can easily see, all these literature references or suggested books belong to the genre of therapy and self-help books. And you may recognize some famous names, I guess, Viktor Frankl. If you have been interested in psychology, it's probably a figure you have heard. And I guess recently, Eckhart Tolle, he has been very popular in certain circles, and maybe even some other of these titles are something that you have heard. Maybe you have even read at least some of these books. So I can't help but repeat ChatGPT's pious wish. I hope you find these recommendations helpful. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Tommi. That was an interesting approach, and I can actually tell that was a good tip. Next time I will have a lecture, I will look to ChatGPT, because many of those things are exactly what psychologists talk about. So you made life easier.
That's right, you save time.
Yes, I save time. Thank you. Now you have an opportunity to ask questions to each other, Amy or Tommi, or comments, or asking further about something that you mentioned. Who is first, Tommi or Amy?
I have a question.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. So I would love to hear your thoughts on the practice of gratitude, and specifically who are we grateful to, or who or what are we grateful to?
Yeah, good and important question. I think that it in a way depends on many things. First of all, to whom you can have a kind of specific feeling of gratitude depends on the situations. As the ChatGPT seemed to suggest, it in a way, or one of its guidelines emphasize that it would be good if you can find other people, be they your friends or your family members or any other trusted person with whom you can share your inner feelings, including anxiety, distress, and happiness, and those kinds of things. If you have such a friend or another person with whom you can share your deepest feelings, even negative feelings, I guess that it's easy to answer that you may naturally feel certain kind of gratitude towards that person or persons with whom you have shared your thoughts and feelings. But I guess that you may have also in mind other kind of cases in which you do not necessarily feel gratitude towards a specific person or human being, but you may, many people may think, for example, in a day like this, here in Vaasa we have had a very beautiful morning, and I guess that many people who have taken a walk outside, for example here in this university campus area that is actually very famous, or it is said that this is the most beautiful campus areas in Finland. So people who have been walking here around this university campus in a very beautiful winter morning may have thought that that isn't it wonderful that we have this life, or isn't it wonderful to live? And even if you are thinking this kind of thought or thoughts alone, you may feel gratitude. And coming back to your presentation, I think that it's a very common or relatively common way to frame that sort of gratitude is to say that this may be a kind of spiritual, even religious experience. And especially if you think that it's a kind of, it makes you think some religious ideas, you may think that you feel gratitude to God, or to Jesus, or to Holy Spirit. But I think that there are also lots of people, maybe more and more people increasingly big number of people who are prepared to say that, okay, I have this kind of spiritual experiences and I feel gratitude, but I would not say, or I would not consider myself as a believer, at least not in a very strong sense. But I may feel some sort of gratitude to a power outside me. I guess this kind of thinking might be possible in the case of many people. But it depends. It depends on what kind of person it is questioned in and what kind of frames or what kind of background beliefs the person have. And one traditional set of beliefs and background assumptions is, of course, Christianity and Christian belief. So many, or at least some people, even today, even we are living in a secularized society. Probably in Britain you have even, the secularization has probably gone even further than in Finland. Or I remember that I have read some statistics that most of the British people or people in UK say that they do not share any, or they do not call them Christians. They may be nominally Christians, but most of the people in UK say that they are not Christians. I would say that in Finland, if we consider the number of people who belong to the major denomination, namely the Lutheran Church in Finland, it's still little bit more than 60%. So at least in theory, many Finns could feel or think that they are grateful to God. But you never know what they are thinking.
Thanks, Tommi. Amy, did you have any own thoughts about that matter, or does Tommi have a question?
Yeah, it just struck me as thank you for the answer. Yeah, it just struck me as interesting how important the practice of gratitude is within kind of therapeutic thinking, but historically how important that has been within the Christian faith and actually within wider belief in a higher power, that there's a kind of a goodness to practicing gratitude and thinking about being thankful just beyond the very sort of small circumstances, I guess, of our lives. So yeah, that just struck me as interesting. Particularly, it stood out to me.
Yeah. Yeah, there was so many individual considerations in your wonderful speech that it's a little bit difficult for me to choose from where to start, but maybe towards the end of your talk, you mentioned a couple of times that if you would like to summarize or pick up certain key ideas or concepts in Christian faith that are relevant for our topic, those two ideas or concepts could be peace and forgiveness. And both of them are something that relate to the person of Jesus, or I'm now referring what you said. And I think that's from a Christian point of view, it is perfectly as you said. It's of course in Christianity we have, as all know, we have different denominations, different traditions, different churches, different theologies, and different kinds of focuses. If you are a member of or Roman Catholic, you probably want to emphasize something that the Lutherans might feel not so comfortable or obvious from their traditional perspective. But be it as it may, I think that that many, if not all Christians, probably would be ready to agree that some sort of spiritual peace and forgiveness related to the person of Jesus, they are cornerstones or belong to the package of Christianity, and that's good as it is. But then, as I mentioned, there are many other traditions. I mean, many other religions, many other, one might say, philosophies. In my presentation, I refer to Stoic philosophy and Epictetus, and of course, in antiquity, there were many other philosophical schools, as there are also nowadays, and there are different political ideologies and political ideals, and depending on which of these religious or non-religious ideologies or frameworks you are especially familiar with, either one might say cognitively, so that you can say that I know more about, say, Christianity. One might say, the other one might say that I'm in my childhood, in my family, we have followed Islam or Hinduism or Buddhism, or then there are lots of people in Western countries who might say that in my childhood our family was extremely secular. We didn't go to mass or didn't visit church at all, and I do not have any personal contact to any religious traditions. And from a philosophical and political side, one might also say that my favorite ideology is Marxism or something else. Okay, depending on what is your cognitively and emotionally most loved tradition, or the tradition that with you are familiar with. You may frame your anxieties and your distress and your unhappiness in different terms. And for Christians, it's completely natural and maybe even obvious to turn and pray Jesus to give peace and forgiveness. And that's the way things are for Christians. But if you do not share the same tradition and same background as Samson's, a person might say that, okay, I can understand something about the Christian idea of peace and forgiveness, but because I do not have any personal relationship to that tradition and religion, it's a little bit difficult, at least first, to find a solace or find some help from Christianity, because I see the world in a different way, one might say. I frame my situation and circumstances in different ways, or from other perspective than from a Christian perspective. And if that's the case, one might say that it's not easy to change the way people see their lives. You may need lots of time and lots of discussions, and still after deep attempts to evangelize people, they may still think that, okay, I can appreciate Christian traditions and its theological views, but I still cannot see my life and my situation from that perspective, but I see it from the perspective of, say, Stoicism, or from the perspective of Marxism, or from the perspective of Islam, or from a secular perspective, from the perspective of self-help literature, for example, as the ChatGPT obviously tried to offer us. So I think that it's very, we live in a ideologically and religiously rich world in which we have different ways to frame our problems. And therefore, the Christian answer, with its emphasis on peace and forgiveness, it's not an obvious answer to everyone.
Thank you. May I ask you, in case, or I suppose both of you have probably personally met some disappointments in life, what has helped you personally to deal with the circumstances? Question both to Amy and Tommi.
Please,
What
Amy,
help?
you can start.
So, just sort of picking up on what was just said there, I think my family history was not a religious family. My grandfather raised my father in atheism, and there was a lot of kind of trauma, escape from Soviet occupation, experience of being a refugee and such and so forth after the Second World War. And one of the kind of crucial things about the Christian claim is that there's a claim that this is help from outside us. So regardless of our kind of belief system, the claim is that there is actually a God in real terms, and that he can kind of break into our lives. And so the peace that is on offer, as Jesus said, I do not give as the world gives. There's a sort of supernatural dimension to it, and that's a claim that, you know, we can test and examine personally, even if we don't have a kind of religious background. And that's certainly the story of my family, my experience. So yeah, I would say personally, having experienced real a traumatic experience myself in 2020, and also supporting two people in my immediate family who have experienced profound child abuse, including sexual abuse. I think that sense of one of the things being very helpful within that kind of traumatic experience is having a category for good and evil, and also having a category for ultimate justice as well, even if one doesn't experience justice in this life. And so for myself personally, encountering the person of Jesus and the peace that he can give that kind of transcends circumstance and through relationship with God, but also having a framework that that one is able to trust ultimately that justice will be done, even when one experiences profound injustice or traumatic experiences that, you know, that you wouldn't really be able to say, I can just develop indifference as to whatever the outcome is, you know, like abuse that it would be quite hard to just be stoical about, to find a kind of peace and hope in ultimate justice and divine justice being done. So I think those two things, the personal experience of peace, and that kind of coming alongside psychological trauma therapy and all of the things that psychology can offer in practical terms, but alongside that, an experience of divine or supernatural peace that really breaks in. And then that issue of a framework within which we understand good and evil.
Thanks, Amy, for sharing. What about Tommi?
Yeah, I think this is a very difficult question, because I mean the question that what has or who are the persons or what kind of things have helped me to deal with disappointments and anxieties. I think that I would like to say, and I mean honestly, that the most important individual person that has helped me is my wife. And even if her profession is a family therapist, that may explain something. But in fact,
Right.
actually, we often quarrel. That they are not actually quarrels, but it's some sort of our inside humor or inside activity to have different ideas of the possibility to save marriages in the midst of terrible quarrels and problems and disappointments that are very typical for marriages and human relations in general. But I would say that probably my wife is the most important individual person. But then I think that in many cases, maybe it's part of my personal character or personal way of dealing with things, and I guess this is very typical for Finnish men in general. It's very difficult also for me to speak about my inner feelings. And I can see that especially in the cases where I cannot, in the middle of anxiety or stressful situation, I cannot speak to anyone, not even to my wife. But it's more natural for me to practice some exercise, to have a walk or to go for jogging with our dog or to go to gym or something like that. And only after some hours or maybe even some days, I may step by step approach verbally the problem and discuss it with my wife. Okay, regarding this spiritual or religious aspect of this question, this is a kind of joke, but at the same time it is a half truth, because I think that on different weekdays I have different religious commitments. On Mondays I'm an atheist. On Tuesday I may feel a strong affiliation with Buddhism or with Hinduism. One of my Hindu friend, an American lady who is originally from India, said that she said that I strongly feel that we have been brother and sister in our former life. And I believe in that.
On Tuesday.
In a way. On Tuesdays, on Wednesdays. Then I may feel some commitments to other traditions on other days, but I also can feel that Christianity, that is my home religion. And that is religion that to which I have most personal relationship. Even if that relationship is something that I'm not usually extremely ready or willing to discuss with anybody, because I and many other Finns think that that's my private business. That's funny, because one might say that, okay, religion is something that is social, and at least it has traditionally been a social thing. We would not have Christianity and probably not any other religious traditions if all the people would have been thinking that this is my personal business. Because in order to learn things, we need other persons. And I have learned Christianity from my teachers, partly already from my parents, even if they were not extremely religious. But anyway, I have been raised in a society and in an environment where Christianity played a substantial role. Nowadays, it plays not that substantial role, but I still think that Christianity is number one among traditions, because I know best that tradition, and I have most of my religious, this is a very difficult or dangerous term, experiences. I would not necessarily call them religious experiences, but my religious ideas and experiences, they relate mostly in Christianity, even though I can also appreciate other traditions, and I would not try to convert anyone. I think that it's better to stay in that tradition where you are.
Thank you. So I'm making you a bit uncomfortable asking you to answer questions which you feel like you'd rather not talk about.
Yeah,
Thank you anyway for answering.
You are welcome.
Now I'd like to ask the audience, does any one of you have questions that you want to address either to Amy or to Tommi, or to both? Then just wave and you'll get an opportunity. Yes, please.
What specifically do you disagree with about the other person's perspective or just framework in this discussion or debate?
Okay, I will. Yeah. I'll repeat the question so that Amy also hears. So what specific things do you disagree with in the other speaker's speech?
Please, Amy, if you want to be the first one.
I'm not sure I dare disagree with ChatGPT. I think I would like to just press a little bit into probably a couple of things. One would be around, I guess, what Stoicism can offer, and to really ask the question whether it's enough to say to someone in distress that the ideal is to kind of be indifferent, like that's a satisfying answer. And then I think probably that would just be a small point. I think the more substantial point would be to, I guess, press into whether this idea that we just inherit the perspectives of our culture and truth is just totally relative and personal, whether that really holds up. And I guess to suggest that the Christian faith is trying to say something different. It was born into, obviously Jesus was born into the ancient world where there were myriads of different views and opinions, and it was a kind of disruptor idea. And so although in the West we've had this kind of power of Christendom and this kind of inherited tradition on one level, actually the heart of the Christian faith is a claim that there is a truth outside of us, that God does exist, and that he reveals himself to this world, first and foremost in the incarnation of Jesus. Mm-hmm. But this is a disruptive idea to our systems, and it's a kind of challenge to inherited belief or even presuppositions. And we're kind of called to make a response to that. And so, yeah, I would be interested to hear what you think of that claim.
Yeah, I fully agree with you that it's it obviously seems to be the case that Christianity maybe it's also typical for other religious traditions that they include certain kind of power, and I do not mean that in terms of divine power, but it may be also a kind of social and psychological power that is able to cause some disruption or change our ways of thinking, so that we are not necessarily enclosed or we are not fixed and determined to follow our tradition, be they family traditions or other social traditions. Our ways of thinking, also our religious thinking and religious experiences can be changed. For example, here in Vaasa we have one of the oldest prison buildings in the whole Finland, Vaasa prison, and I remember an interview in a local newspaper. If I remembering now right, the director or the head of that prison said that in many cases, if a long-time prisoner face disruption or life-changing change, that change is related to religion, or they become believers, and that change their life and they part. They do not return to the prison. Whereas many of those prisoners who have not faith fine and have a kind of habit of committing crimes, they may return to the same prison. Now, I'm not suggesting that religious faith is the only way to change your attitudes and your view of life. This is something that I have learned from my wife, because she believes in family therapy and the possibility to change even difficult relationships. I have been a little bit skeptic on that, but as I said, that's a kind of internal joke. But anyway, I agree with you. It's possible to become changed, but that change is not necessarily religious change. It can be also something else. Now the difficult question is that how to change usually requires that people are somehow motivated to that change. It's very difficult to make any changes if you are completely unmotivated. But what makes you motivated, for example, to become interested in the key ideas of Christianity? I think that's an interesting question and very difficult one, and probably different people have different answers to that. Maybe someone might say that if they meet another person who gives a very strong proclamation of the related to Jesus and how Jesus can bring the peace and forgiveness, that may help. Whereas other people may think that sounds a little bit frightening, or they are not so, they do not feel so comfortable with that sort of approach, and they may need another approach. They may, for example, need that they have time to read good books, as ChatGPT recommended.
Thanks. Did you have anything that you disagree with Amy on?
I don't think that we disagree. We come from different backgrounds. We have, of course, we have had different life experiences in our lives. We have met different people. Probably we have read at least some of the same books, I guess, Bible included. But I think that if there are disagreements, they are relatively, I'm not sure, should I say that they are superficial. They may be deep, but not that deep that I would say that we come from different planets.
Does anybody have any other question? Yes, please.
I would like to make a comment regarding Amy's statements in the beginning, where she talked a lot about anxiety. And one thing that I've heard that I've found to be, in my life at least, true, is that a major factor to anxiety is self-centeredness, which is very common in the Western world today, where everything is taught or we are taught to think always individually, and everything is individualistic, and we are taught to always focus on ourselves. But when we focus on ourselves, we always tend to focus on just our problems, and it is we find a much greater purpose when we think about other people than just ourselves. And it was also a command that Jesus gave, that we should love one another. So I would say that a great purpose is that we live for one another, and and we, for example, if you work at if you have a job and work at this place, your main reason being there is not to get the paycheck, is that you are doing a job for someone else.
Okay, I'll try to summarize that long question. Tell me if I fail. Well, you commented that one reason behind anxiety is our tendency to be self-centered. And that stems from an individualistic way of living. But instead, if we focus on others, that makes us more happy. And that was also like one of Jesus's commands, that we should love one another. Mm-hmm. Was that enough summarized, or did I forget something? Yes, okay. Was there a question related to this, or more comment?
It was a question is to both, do you agree with this view?
Okay, so the question is, do you agree with this view that it's helpful to focus on other and help each other?
Amy, please.
Yes, I do agree, but I think it's secondary rather than primary, if that makes sense. So I think that ultimately, at the heart of the Christian faith, we don't work to save ourselves or redeem ourselves. There's a power outside of us through our Creator God, and then ultimately in the person of Jesus, God incarnate, God in flesh, in history, and that God's love for this world and for all of us is demonstrated in the person of Jesus and through the crucifixion of Jesus, the suffering of Jesus, and we are recipients of grace, so we're helped from outside. So we're not looking to ourselves as human beings to be able to work our way out of anxiety or any other aspect of the human condition. There's love and grace there on offer. And then once that has been received, once we're a sort of recipient of grace, there's this tremendous good of going into the world and taking the love of God and being other focused. So yes, I agree that there's real help in that, but I don't think that that's the primary vehicle or the primary mechanism for us being helped, or what Christians would call being saved, if that makes sense. And actually that again is quite unique in certainly other religious systems, where other religious systems would put a strong emphasis on, following a path to enlightenment, certain steps one needs to follow, or rituals or things that we need to do in order to achieve a kind of status with God or achieve a state of well-being. And the Christian faith positions that first sort of step of anything with God as being us actually receiving, and that's an individual thing, but it's also a communal thing. Often Western Christians have overly emphasized the individual, and actually it's very much position grace is received in community as well. But it's from that receipt of grace, that experience of grace, of receiving the love of God, that we're then kind of empowered to be other focused, not self-focused. So yes, I agree, but I wouldn't say that being other focused is the primary. It's a kind of outworking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the question you pose, it's very relevant and something that I have also been thinking quite often, and it seems to me that it's somehow true or somehow a good and relevant view of our own time, that we are living in a way in a culture that somehow wants to focus or emphasize certain kind of self-focus or self-centeredness. I guess that there are various kinds of historical currents that have led to this situation. The scholars in the history of philosophy say that the Western idea of individual and individualism was created or was born in the late medieval times, say in the 13th century. And at least since that, in the West, in the Western world, it seems that some sort of self-centeredness has been a very, very strong current. But it's probably not only question of culture, but one might say that there's probably also some biological reasons, because we are in a way points of consciousness. We are conscious of our own thoughts or our own feelings. I cannot see inside your head, but I know what I'm thinking, or at least I'm assuming that I know what I'm thinking. And this fact that we are in a way points of consciousness, in a way closed points. Of course we can communicate with each other and tell what we are thinking and how we are feeling, but often we are alone with our thoughts. And this is a kind of, one might say, biological fact that we cannot see through our brains and see what other persons are thinking, but we are now quite well aware, but not fully aware even of our own thoughts. But your question also raised another question in me, or actually several questions, and one is that it is actually so that in the Protestant Christianity there are certain ways of saying, or certain ways of speaking about, say, about Jesus, for example, that in a way emphasize this kind of self-centeredness when compared maybe to some other traditions in which some sort of communality or more socially focused streams are stronger. And one example is one expression that is used in many branches of Protestant Christianity is the question that, have you found your personal Jesus, personal Savior? I think that's an extraordinary question. What does that mean? Personal Jesus. we do not ask that question of any other person, because it would not make sense at all. Have you met your personal wife? What does it mean? Is it a joke? But in the context of Christianity, it may make some sense. And I would say that it makes sense, especially in the context where your personal and individual religious, spiritual relationship to God, to Jesus, is somehow considered especially important. But I think that in the history of religions, we have other traditions. I would say that, for example, in Judaism, that sort of self-centeredness is probably not so typical. Maybe not even in Islam, but I'm not sure about that. But I think that if we would like to find out a very good religious example of self-centeredness, Protestant Christianity might be a good starting point.
Amy, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I would. Some of that I agree with. I think some of the outworking of a strong emphasis on individual and personal response to God, some of the outworking that has been negative, but there is also something profoundly positive there. If you think about Jesus's crucifixion, and how the New Testament describes Jesus's death as God so loving the whole world that he gives his only son, that whoever believes in him. So all of us have access to God through the crucifixion of Jesus. It's this corporate offer. God so loves the world. Anyone who believes is given this offer of eternal life. And at the same time, so the love of God is kind of for the world, but the love of God is also for us as people. And, as Jesus is dying, he dies between two individuals, two people convicted of crimes. And one of them hurls insults at him, but the other says, Jesus, will you remember me when you come into your kingdom? And Jesus says to him, today you will be with me in paradise. So there's this incredible imminence and definite promise for the individual. And I think Protestantism has sought to, I guess, center that, that imminent personal love of God for you as a person, as an individual, the possibility of a relationship with God. But it's certainly true to say that the emphasis of Judaism was on the community, and in a lot of Jesus's teaching, there's more of an emphasis on the kingdom of God, which is a kind of corporate idea that we know God in community and we follow Jesus in community. So I think both are there, and I think that it's a fair critique of one of the dangers of an overemphasis on the individual you can see in Protestantism around sort of self-centeredness. But there's also real good there in that promise of the hope of that individual relationship with God through Christ. And, Jesus thought it was important enough to have that conversation even whilst dying, talking to the thief on the cross next to him.
Let's go back to where we started. Amy, you started off telling that we live now in an age of anxiety, and you mentioned we've had pandemics, we've had wars, but actually this age of anxiety was happening already before the pandemic and before the war. And it's also interesting to notice that this is not the only times of hardship in the world. If we look at our Finnish history, we can go back to the times of World War, which is also the same for Britain. During those times, life was insecure. We didn't know, will Russia take us or will it not? I've heard that when Paasikivi went to Moscow in 1939 in order to negotiate with the Soviet Union, a horde of people was following the train, and they were singing a well-known hymn written by Martin Luther. the name in English, a safe stronghold, our God is still. Vår Gud är oss en väldig borg in Swedish. I don't know in Finnish. And I'm reflecting upon the difference. We're living in hardship today. We lived it 70 years ago. But what is different? Back then, hordes of people were singing hymns. Today, nobody is singing hymns. Perhaps at church, 10 persons can sing at a time. But there's been a huge difference in society related to secularism. And I wonder, could secularism, the increase of secularism, be a direct reason behind the increased anxiety? Comments on this?
So one of the things I skipped over because my presentation was too long, but was examining, there's in some of the philosophical literature, there's studies that examine the connection between the pursuit of affluence and increase in depression and anxiety. And there's a British psychologist called Oliver James, his thesis is called Affluenza, but he talks about affluenza as a virus-like condition that spreads through affluent countries. In these countries, people define themselves by how much money they make, and by far, he notes, by far the most significant consequence of what he describes as selfish capitalism is the startling increase in the incidence of mental health illness in both children and adults since the 1970s. So in the literature, there's an interest in the connection between pursuing a kind of consumerist, materialist dream and the increase in depression and anxiety. I think that's something that's being studied at the moment and is really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah, I think also that this is a very complex issue, that what is behind the increasing number of people who feel anxiety or are stressed. Okay, first of all, the problem is that we would need a kind of historical data about if this is at all truth or okay, I don't know how reliable this kind of comparisons between different eras are, but it may be the case. Maybe we have a kind of intuitive idea that maybe anxiety and stress, feeling stressful, it has increased, or not at least decreased. But what is behind this? I guess there are so many different reasons for that I would not say that there's only one reason, be it secularization or some other reason. Probably consumerism, self-centeredness, present-day working life that is very stressful in many ways. Also the fact that we know more nowadays about all kinds of problems, be they war in Ukraine or some other global problems that may also cause anxiety. But yeah, I think that there must be many reasons, or at least that's the best guess I would have.
Thanks. Does the audience have any question? Yes, please.
I have one question for Tommi directly. It is regarding, you mentioned that mindfulness is today more widely accepted, that actually originates from Buddhism. I would like to add that the same applies to yoga, that it comes from Hinduism originally, and these are actually from the beginning spiritual practices. Could you have an answer or theory why this is today accepted in the secular world?
Mm-hmm. Now there was a question directed to Tommi about when he mentioned that mindfulness is now considered to be a secular practice. So has yoga been? And you asked how has it come that that has been acceptable in our society as a secular thing?
Very good and interesting question. You are completely right that also yoga could be taken as an example of an Indian originated tradition and actually a philosophical school. Yoga is not only some spiritual practice, but it is also one of the classical Hindu schools. And it's true that yoga as well as mindfulness, in the form they are presented in the West nowadays, come, one might say, in a watered-down version, which means that those religious backgrounds and religious assumptions are put somewhere in the background, or they are forgotten. But I think that this is how things go. There are many practices that may have had a different original form than they are presented to us nowadays. I don't see any specific danger in that from the point of view of practitioners of mindfulness or yoga. I don't believe in that sort of theory that if you practice yoga or mindfulness, you are in a way giving one of your foods or at least fingers to Hindus or Buddhism. You may do that without any ideological hesitation. But anyway, it might be good to find out that what are the roots of those traditions. It may help you perhaps understand something about their background. But okay, I think that they are both of these practices are completely good. Especially for yoga, the biggest obstacle is that you probably need to be a little bit flexible. For example, more flexible than I. I cannot practice yoga for biological reasons or physiological reasons.
When talking about hardships, one word that is pretty often mentioned nowadays is resilience. And with resilience, you mean your ability to be flexible and to adjust to different circumstances and learn and cope with circumstances. And research shows that the sense of purpose, the belief in a meaning, is something which actually increases your resilience. And I would like to ask both of you, how do you find purpose and meaning in difficulties? And try to answer shortly. 2 minutes.
Good question. Okay, I already started. I would say in a very short way that one thing that especially annoyed me in the answers of ChatGPT was that it tried to give a ready-made package, even if the advices or suggestions it gave they made sense. They were good advices, but somehow it was. I felt annoyed, and probably this and that I felt annoyed is related to your question in the way that I do not believe that you can always find meaningfulness in the middle of your anxiety and stressful situation. I think that you must accept that there are things in the world that do not make sense at all. And it would be wrong to try to change that.
Thanks, Tommi. Amy, any comments? Amy, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
Forgetting English.
I think I would want to sort of flip the question around in a way and say that because as a follower of Jesus and as a Christian, I do believe that there is an ultimate purpose for this world, that there is a good and loving God who is the creator of this world. I am, as a Christian, encouraged not to believe that my life will be without difficulty or trauma or even disaster, but I'm encouraged to sort of lift my eyes beyond my own circumstances and the circumstances of this life, and to live into a bigger story, a story of a good and loving God, and a story of a God who will ultimately bring justice in this world. And so, although in the minutiae of the pain and suffering of this world, although in the devastation of an experience of trauma or abuse, I may not be able to say, here's the specific purpose in this small or awful specific incidents, I can say that my life is lived with a bigger sense of purpose, and I can rest in that purpose and in that God who's behind that. And that gives me a sense of perspective in what I'm going through, that it doesn't define who I am, that tragedy or trauma or disaster or suffering or disappointment is one piece in a bigger picture. And so I think sometimes the Christian faith is painted as, just come to God and he'll protect you from all suffering. And that's not at all what we see in the Bible. And sometimes people jump in too quickly and say, well, here's God's purpose in this very specific suffering. And that isn't in the Bible either. But there is this trust in the ultimate goodness and justice of God, into which we can rest, and that gives us hope, as well as meaning in this life, even when we go through suffering.
Thank you, Amy. We have 10 minutes left, so some last question is okay. Does anybody have a question? Yes, please. We have a question there.
So I have a question for Tommi, if that's all right. And it seems you said that you agree quite a lot with what Amy was presenting. I would like to ask you, in the case of an existential crisis in your life, often people have more than one existential crisis. If not, when right before your death, you start to think more about life and so on, and that point of living. Would you, in that situation, do you think turn to the chat GPT, or let's say it's quite, let's say it would be in 5 years or so. Would you turn to the chat GPT or self-help books, or would you turn to just any kind of religion, or would you try to be stoic, try to just be stoic, or would you turn to the risen Christ and ask for help and ask if he is really existing?
This is a question directed to Tommi. In case of an existential crisis, would you turn to ChatGPT, or would you turn to what were the alternatives now? Being stoic, or any religion, or even Jesus.
Yeah, good. And from a personal point of view, important question.
And you don't have to answer it if you think it's too personal.
No,
You don't need to answer if it's too personal.
Yeah, I understand that it's not too personal, or I'm not sure whether it's too personal or not. First, I started to think that probably I intuitively would say the same blessing, Lord's blessing that we say with my wife every night when we go to sleep, unless I have already slept. So probably that would be what I would say, but that would be a kind of intuitive reaction, not probably a kind of conscious decision to do something religiously good or recommended activity. But let's see, my personal thinking and reactions have changed throughout my life. I'm already 55 years old, and I have not had the same habits, same reactions throughout my life, but probably because we have read that blessing already for so many years, probably that would come to my mind as one of the things to do. But still, it might be the case that in an existential crisis, if I would survive it, I might also consult ChatGPT. And maybe I could make a little bit refinement into my query, namely, and you can test this at home, please add as a kind of additional part in that original question, if you would like to get a kind of Christian answer, you might ask from ChatGPT the same question as I did, but from the point of view of Christianity, or from the point of view of Christian faith. Or if you want to ask the same thing from the Buddhist perspective, then you add from the point of view of Buddhist faith, or whatever is. It might be interesting to see how the ChatGPT answer. It may be that this year the answers are not necessarily so good if you make lots of additions, but probably that bot will develop year by year better and better.
Thank you. We're about to end this event in a couple of minutes, but we'll end with asking Amy and Tommi, what was the most important in this discussion? What do you want all of us to remember? Amy, would you like to start?
Yeah, thank you. I think I'd love people to take away that question and consider whether there is a truth and a personal God sort of outside of ourselves, not dependent on our culture or circumstances, but a God who actually exists, who's the author of the story, who brought this world into existence, and consider the possibility that he is real and that he is interested in you, and that those two offers, the offer of peace and the offer of forgiveness, are both relevant, like we really need them as human beings, but possibility that they're actually existentially real as well, that you could experience them. So I'd love you to consider that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I have been sitting on this chair for a while, and I have been looking at you, and a couple of things has come to my mind. First of all, it has been very nice to see that there are so many of you who have considered this topic interesting or something that is relevant for you, I guess, personally and socially. And relating to that, I think that maybe the fact that there are so many of you, this in a way shows how important it is that there are other people who share same kind of problems and anxieties and stressful situations. So maybe you are the best lecture or teaching that this kind of event can offer, that by coming together you can hopefully gain something. At least I think that the atmosphere here has been very good and pleasant and friendly.
Thank you all for participating. Thank you, Tommi. Thank you, Amy. And please remember, you have these forms in front of you. Please fill in. This is how you experience this event, and this will help the organizers organizing even better in the future. And after this, there's also some treats back in the corner, so please stay and you can continue discussing where you sit, or you can stand up. Thank you very much, all of you, and hope to see you again.
Thanks.